Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar with Rachael Cristine Woody. My name is Bradley, and I will be your moderator for this webinar titled, I Finally Have a Museum CMS, Now What? Before we start, I would like to provide some information about our company and introduce today's presenter. Lucidea is a software developing company specialized in museum and archival collections management solutions, as well as knowledge management and library automation systems. Our brands include Sydney, Presto, Argus, Archivera, Eloquent, and Quadrastar. Now, I would like to take a moment and introduce today's presenter, Rachael Cristine Woody. Rachael is the owner of Relicura and provides services to museums, libraries, and archives. She specializes in museum collections management systems, digitization technology, digital project management, and digital usership. During the course of her career, she has successfully launched multiple digital projects that include advanced digitization technology, collaborative portals, and the migration of collection information into collections management systems. She is also a popular guest author for Lucidea's Think Clearly blog and has provided us with many great webinars that are listed on our website. So please feel free to check those out after today's session. Take it away, Rachael.
Great. Thank you so much, Bradley, and for Lucidea for hosting us today. And thank you all for joining for this particular webinar. It's an exciting one because you've finally gotten in a new CMS, whether it's your first brand new to the museum collections management system or just a newer evolution in the system that you're using. Regardless of which origin story you are coming from, there are some typical strategies and approaches we want to make sure that we take the time to do as we get to know and implement the new CMS, and especially thinking about the more procedural ways and how our work at the museum can better integrate the collections management system and ultimately help do our work in a more efficient and hopefully more intuitive and fun fashion. So with that in mind, we're going to cover what to do first. So typical things to take a look at regardless of what or which CMS you have in place. We'll take a look at how the data will enter your collections management system. Each one is a bit different, as well as some different approaches in terms of process. We'll look at how to effectively capture data in the CMS. No matter which CMS tool you're using, there are usually a few different options available to you. We'll look at how to create a start to finish process for the collections management system. So very process oriented in terms of step by step, start to finish, what that looks like for you and your team using your CMS. And then we'll cover some additional reading that, depending on which of the topics you could use some more support around, we have a list to get you started in terms of the different details and areas that we covered today. So what to do first? So this part, we have selected the collections management system. We have, if it was a proprietary system, we've worked with a vendor to get it implemented and configured. If it's not a proprietary and open source, either you perhaps worked with a third-party vendor or perhaps you have technical knowledge on your team to get the system configured and implemented, at least from a technical perspective. So now is the point in time where the system is there, you can log into it, it's ready for you to start using. And the first thing we want to make sure we do, if this was not already covered during your time in the configuration stage of the CMS, is to really take a moment to get to know it. So many of the collections management system companies now offer a suite of on-demand webinars and trainings and even different process manuals, depending on the part of the CMS you want to work in. So I encourage you to reference those, but I also heavily encourage you to explore your CMS and in particular focus on the areas that you would be most involved in using. If you are a small shop and you wear many hats, that may mean that you are exploring several different areas within a collections management system. So for example, not just object record creation or accession record creation, you may also be working with like an exhibition module or a conservation module. Whereas if you are part of a larger team, perhaps there's just one area that you are focused on. For example, if you are a museum registrar, then you'll typically focus on the accession and object intake in that initial object record creation. So regardless of what your roles are, make sure you explore each of those areas to get to know what are the fields in terms of what you can expect, start to familiarize yourself with what your options are. Of course, we want to make sure that those also support what your best practices may be in terms of the fields that you use, as well as how you use them. And we also want to make sure that you are familiar with the different functionality behind this different CMS tools. For example, collections management systems are not just data capture anymore. They have many other functionalities to help support some of the very basic museum functions in terms of creating like an outgoing exhibition, for example, um, recording and tracking the conservation assessment through treatment, even doing, for example, the moving of locations, which happens more often than we would like in our museum world. And many of the collections management systems nowadays can really help do the heavy lifting in terms of tracking moving box A from location 1 to location 2, down to being able to use barcodes typically, as well as being able to do like the mass movement of items once you've executed a move for that day. So knowing what those functionalities are and playing with them ahead of time before you need to use them can be incredibly important, because that will help inform your future approach to projects, as well as helping you use the system at its most efficient. Once you've gotten to explore and get to know your system, I recommend establishing templates. For some CMS options, you can create a template right within that collections management system. Sometimes that's an official template and you can name it like accession record template. For other collections management systems that may not be as robust, sometimes you can create what I would call a dummy record or a fake record, one that never makes its way to the public, but is one that you can reference or make a duplicate of to then edit, so that you make sure you're using all of the fields that your museum has established for your best practices. And failing that, if you don't have access to templates within the CMS, you can of course always create some written instructions as part of your process document for people to follow in terms of providing that template style and providing the fields that you would use for that template. And then just an emphasis on 3 in terms of practicing and using the tools. So we talked a bit about some of like the functionality for moving. So really honing in on the areas that you would use, doing some experimentation and pre-testing before you actually need those areas will be very important. Next thing to do is understand how data will enter the CMS. So this, I do want to note, is nuanced and different from a massive data migration, which is a topic we've covered here previously. Instead, this is, you have the CMS in place. If data from your older system needed to migrate over, that has already happened. And so what we're focused on today, and with this particular slide, is moving forward. How will the data enter your collections management system as a matter of process, but also from which sort of technical tools you will use? It will depend on the type of data that you need to put into your CMS, but it will also depend on the collections management system that you are using and whether or not it has some robust tool functionality in terms of ingesting data, or whether it's a bit more the basic style of being able to take in data. So get to know your CMS. If you're not sure of how data can enter the particular system that you have, reaching out to the vendor, if there is one, to make sure you're understanding all of the options that you have. Even for open source products, there's usually some pretty good product documentation that you should be able to search with like a Control F or Command F to search for import or ingest of data. And the reason I mention this here, because again, we're not talking about migrating past data, but I mentioned this ability for like bulk importing or ingesting, because if you are needing to catch up on backlog of cataloging, if you need to do a massive move of records or mass creation of records, being able to do that more than just like a one for one will be more efficient and help you keep your sanity. So knowing whether or not that's possible and then how that is possible is important to ascertain before you start really using your system. So first and foremost, if you are able to use an import tool with the system, that can be one of the most effective Typically, that will be some sort of spreadsheet template that you can get from the system that you can then mass populate with your data and then import that spreadsheet into the system to then be assigned to create the records. Sometimes this is a tool that you have access to as a member. Other times you may have to or need to work with the vendor to use this particular import tool if it's available. Whether or not there is a dedicated import tool, if you're looking at needing to move a massive amount of data, I do recommend connecting with your vendor, if you have one, to talk about the scope of the data you're trying to import and make sure that you have all of the strategies available to you. Your vendor, of course, will know the collections management system the best and will be able to offer some insight to you in terms of how best to formulate the data, providing a template if there's a specific format that they need in place, and will help you be able to think through some of the strategies before committing to one. There may also be the ability to do some bulk creation. So if you don't have an import tool or are not a fan of the import tool and you just want to do within the system some bulk creation, that is often functionality that is available for many of the collections management systems out there. And so this would be another area where you could do some bulk creation of records that share some similar data and then being able to do some more rapid entry data for specific details that may differ across the records. So you've got some options there. And then of course there's the old school one at a time record creation, which is also perfectly acceptable, especially if you're doing it as a more ad hoc approach to cataloging versus needing to do like a backlog or a bulk approach to your cataloging. So you have several options available typically, and understanding how each of those would work and whether or not they're more appropriate for your particular setting or process is helpful to identify ahead of time, especially before you need it, so that you have all the details at hand when you are ready to start working on your project versus needing to wait to connect with the vendor or waiting to learn more about the import tools. So that's why it's like the second thing to do in terms of as you explore the system, that next second part being important as to how your data will enter the system moving forward. Next up is how to effectively capture data in the CMS. So we touched on this in terms of the second most important thing in terms of how is your data getting into the collections management system. And now we're going to take a look at the methods and approaches for moving forward. What are some of the effective ways of capturing that data? The two most common methods, especially if you are not in like your office most of the time, especially for registrars or conservators, you're working like in the stacks or in the lab or even like in the exhibition hall. So many of the times that we need to capture information about our objects or about a particular project with that object, we are not actually at our desks. And so being mobile can be a huge aid, even if that is having a spreadsheet loaded on your laptop to capture some of that information, or at least making notes to then put into a spreadsheet for import later. Also, many of the collections management systems now are cloud-based, and so depending on your particular implementation, which can be restrictive if you've got some additional security measures, but being cloud-based means that if you have an internet connection, you can typically log into your collections management system online and be able to start capturing some of that data on your laptop or even if you have a mobile device. So whether that is an application in your mobile device or using the mobile version of the website to log into your collections management system, you've got some options there in terms of being mobile, capturing data on the fly, and being able to either put it in a spreadsheet or directly into your records. In terms of approaches, and as we move forward with cataloging, if you have a backlog especially, it may be effective to choose an approach on a focus area. So for example, having some sort of criteria of maybe exhibition schedules. So knowing which exhibitions are coming up in the next few years, perhaps that helps you to prioritize which areas of the backlog you work on for your objects. Or you can choose criteria based on commonality, which can build off efficiencies within some shared data or the benefits of research being able to apply to multiple objects. So choosing something like objects made by same creator or same cultural community, choosing objects that are from a similar time period or are of a similar medium, any sort of commonality that can help you economize essentially the work that you are doing across the widest amount of records possible. So that is the two most common approaches, especially when you are looking at doing a backlog approach to cataloging versus just the ad hoc one at a time. The next thing to consider once you finally have your CMS up and running is how to create a start to finish process. So as we've gone through, we've gotten to explore our system, we've gotten to know it, we have learned how data can enter our particular collections management system. We've even now considered the different methods and approaches for how we can capture data for that ingesting into our collections management system. And once you have explored and determined which works best for you in each of those circumstances, it's time to create that start to finish process, which will be specific to your museum, of course, specific to the team you have available and who will be working, and specific to the collections management system that you have. I definitely recommend for many of the collections management systems, there is now some sort of training booklet or process manual. That is certainly excellent to reference from the technical perspective. However, writing the process down also for the non-technical aspects and how it would then include using the CMS is just as important. So as we think about your process documentation, I want you to consider the fundamentals. So as basic as what does it look like to create the accession record? What is the prior event that leads to that accession record? So typically getting the object in, having the paperwork finished, creating that accession record, then leading to, of course, research on the object, capturing dimensions, reference photographs, then creating that object record, assigning location. And those steps, depending on your setup, depending on the CMS, some of those may happen concurrently and at the same time. Others may be this step first and then followed by this next step. So that is why it's highly attuned to you and your team at the museum, even if you are a team of one. And it will depend then, of course, on the CMS and how that can be integrated. So documenting the fundamental areas, documenting what the steps are for each of those activities, what leads to the next step, and of course, bringing in CMS supports. So in addition to just the, I'm putting data into my catalog, we want to make sure that we're also capturing that functionality of the collections management system that can help us do our jobs more efficiently. So if there is a need for moving the collections, if there's a need for outgoing loan tracking, um, any sort of museum activity that is for your particular setting, using the collections management system and its different areas of functionality to help support. So also making sure that that is included in your documentation if it is ever a part of your process, whether day-to-day process or on an annual basis kind of process. So thinking of that in its entirety, thinking of the fundamental areas that you'd be using, thinking of how the CMS can help be implemented and integrated into that process, and ultimately documenting all of it specific to your settings, specific to your staff and museum, and specific to the best practices that you've established. So we covered quite a bit, and it was more of a broad overview approach to how to get to know your CMS now that you finally have it and it is implemented and ready to go. There are several different blogs and other webinars you can check out if you need a deeper dive into any of the details that we talked about. We've gathered a selection of blog posts where you may want to start. Some of these focus on the, okay, you have a CMS, now what sort of topics? Some of them focus on the migration of data, if that is of a future interest for you. We have some of the establishing of the museum best practices that, of course, we need to think about and have established before we use our CMS in an ideal world, as well as workflow and record creation, concepts of data cleanup, and other things to consider when you are working within your CMS. So we covered what to do first, what were some of the areas that we need to explore and why. We covered how data can enter your collections management system and how to get to finding out that knowledge if it's not immediately obvious to you. We covered how to effectively capture data in the CMS, both in terms of methods and approach. We covered how to create a start to finish process for the collections management system, making it specific to both your setting in the museum as well as your collections management system. And then we covered some additional reading that can give you a deeper dive into some of the topics that we've covered here today. And then, of course, digital projects in general often include the collections management system. And so if you have digital projects in your future, I definitely recommend downloading a free copy of our latest ebook collaboration, Prepare for Takeoff, Get Your Museum Digital Project Off the Ground, and courtesy of Lucidea Press. So go grab that free e-copy if you haven't already. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I will hand it back over to Bradley.
Thank you, Rachel, for the wonderful presentation. And if you'd like to learn more about our museum collections management system called Argus, please feel free to visit our website or reach out to us at sales@lucidea.com, and we would be happy to have a discussion with you. If you have any more questions on any of our software or our company, our contact details are listed on the screen. And please stay tuned for more webinars and content related to the series. On behalf of the Lucidea team, I thank you all for attending today, and until next time, thanks.